KQ on the Avenue is made possible in part with funds from Genesee Valley Council of the Arts Aid to Localities program. Enjoy the show.
We'd like to welcome you to KQ on the Avenue. We'd like to welcome you to KQ on the Avenue. We'd like to welcome you to KQ on the Avenue. We'd like to welcome you to KQ on the Avenue.
All right, thank you guys for tuning in to episode 3 of KQ on the Avenue. I am your host and producer, Wayne Benson Jr.
I am Monique Franz, the senior editor for Kinsman Quarterly, Kinsman Avenue Publishing.
And we have a wonderful guest with us today. Doyle-Gillespie is a Baltimore city poet and writer. His poems, as he says, are drawn from the raw fodder of his world travel and his work in education and law enforcement, which we'll definitely get into. His poems represent his fascination with history and culture and how those forces play roles in his intimate parts of our lives. He has many, many books, which have amazing titles, by the way. Masala Tea and Oranges, on the later edition of Sancho Panza, if I said that correctly. Socorro Prophecy, Gentrifying the Plague House, which is another great title, and Aerial Act. And his most recent is Father of the Red Grotto Used Bookstore. He has a BA in history from George Washington University, a master's in liberal arts from Johns Hopkins, and he was the first place grand prize winner of the Iridescence Award.
Oh, yeah.
And the third place winner of the African Diaspora Award for last year, 2024. So round of applause for that.
Yes.
Third place winner of the Westmoreland Arts and Heritage Festival, and an honorable mention in the Rhonda Gail Wilford Award for Poetry. Give it up for
yes.
Doyle-Gillespie.
Wait a minute, I want to cut in just a little bit. I know this is a little off script, but you have the dopest titles to your collections and your poems, man. If people knew how much a title brought you in, I mean, you just got a gift for those titles. What's up with that?
The titles, my wife always says they're so long. Like, what's it's like you're trying to tell the story. I think part of it is I like language, and I like trying to squeeze as much out of it as I can in some cases.
The actual cost of her bangles, that was just dope. You know, it just makes you want to understand. It makes you want to dive in. So I just wanted to say that's a dope part of your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, and as I was looking out, I don't even know what Masala Tea is, but just the title with that and oranges, I was like, I got to try this stuff. I don't.
Have you tried it?
Not yet, but he got to. Now I got to.
I had a student whose parents came from India. He was first generation American, and he brought it to me one day. It's masala tea, and so there were times I was like grading papers and stuff. He goes, "I'll make you some chai." And he would go to the kitchen and bring it back for me. And so this actually fell in love with that.
Man.
Oh my goodness. That's so awesome. And one of the reasons I'm super excited for this episode is that it's National Poetry Month still, and I'm so glad that we were able to get you here for National Poetry Month. I'm also a poet as well, so I'm really like, let's go.
Let's go.
And so my first question for you, and I like to ask this to a lot of poets, was there an inciting incident for you when in terms of poetry, right? I think a lot of times, you know, as writers, you know, there's so much at our disposal, poetry, fiction. And so choosing that medium, I'm always interested in how people decided upon poetry as their medium of choice. So I would love to hear what that was for you.
Yeah, you know, I wish I could say there was some dramatic point of debarkation, but I grew up with it. Mom was a literature teacher, and so there was always poetry of some sort around, and I've continued to read. I've always been an omnivorous reader, and poetry was always part of it. And so over time, I just developed I started taking my poetry more seriously and looking into poems more seriously, and it's through the different chapters of my life, the poetry has taken different forms and has evolved. And so, I mean, I think I got to a point at which it was very cathartic.
Mhm.
It was just about me releasing. So it's evolved over time. It's evolved.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think you're talking about it being cathartic, is real in terms of poets and why poets, put words to paper. But what made you begin to put that work out there?
Okay, so one thing was I got a lot of positive feedback and from people just around me as I wrote. And I'd always thought, I think it was in college that I first started to submit work. And just thought, this is something I'm just going to keep picking away at it and see how it goes and see if it's receptive, if people are receptive. And it's interesting to me that it very quickly became like it's not a matter of wow, they like my work and now it's out there, look at this, but people responding to it. I think that's the thing I found most gratifying.
Mm.
Someone would say to you, I read that piece and it really moved me, or it really
Yeah.
said something to me. It really helped me in some way. It's like that. That's the thing I found to be most gratifying, and so I wanted more interaction with people through poetry. I think
Yeah.
I think as I sit here talking about it and processing it, it's a matter of connecting with people
Yeah.
and bringing them ideas through poetry. Yeah.
I have to
That
say, I have to say,
no, go ahead.
when with the iridescence, when we had a review team and we're going through the pieces and, and the high scoring um, submissions, I'm going to be honest with you. I, I never thought that I would pick a poetry collection for a speculative fiction contest. You know what I mean? But when we all kind of laid it out, we were like, dude, this poetry collection speaks like a story. You know what I mean? And that was really powerful. We did, I think some contests there is a natural, hope for what you want in the end. So we're hoping for that great story, but your poetry collection spoke like a powerful story of the
Thank
Middle Passage. So it was bad. We enjoyed it.
you. Thank you. It kind of pieced itself together. I mean, it's funny, it sounds always pretentious. Oh, I let my muse take me, but
Right.
but
That muse was alive, right? It was alive.
but it's true that you write things piece by piece and then start to see the continuity, that flows through it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I've always been taken by a lot of it. Has to do with spaces. It has to do
Mhm.
with spaces that we occupy and the stories that they tell. And I've a huge, long-time fan of stories of the paranormal and how those conflate with history and how those conflate with how we interact with space and time. And so all that together, I mean, those pieces just kind of were born out of that. I mean, I remember as I'm sitting here thinking that when I was a kid, watching the Leonard Nimoy show Sightings, where he would talk about all sorts of paranormal stuff, and it wasn't exactly a scientific show, but it was mostly about atmosphere. It was mostly about feeling.
Right.
Um, every horror movie and ghost story, and it was very important to me to collect stories wherever we traveled when I was little, and as time went on, I
Yeah.
to about things like that. I love cryptids. Cryptids are my buddies. So that type of thing has always been churning in me, and so it was really exciting to write those poems and see how they wove themselves together.
That's awesome. I have to add. I was gonna get into this later, but without spoiling, have you heard of the movie Sinners that's out?
So wow,
And
yeah. First of all, I in
because
fact,
it lines up with what you're talking about
oh my
so
gosh.
well.
And what I thought was so funny was I was listening to the writer director being interviewed, um,
Hmm.
and he talked about Salem's Lot, how influenced he was
Mm,
by Stephen King's Salem's Lot. And I stopped what I was doing yesterday. I just took a moment because Salem's Lot scared me to death when I was I was petrified by that story, and so I fell in love with it.
Right.
And
That's such an interesting. Like I was terrified, so I fell in love
Fell
with
in
it.
love with it, right? Right.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's like, Bertolt Brecht would like cut the curtain in half for stage plays, right? And a lot of the theater of the absurd people would do something to like emphasize to you, this is a play. I'm trying to teach you something. So don't just zone out, right?
Right.
And to read a book or see a film where you become so immersed in it, and
Yes.
it's real for you. And it may be a very upsetting reality, but you're coming away from it with with a message. Now,
Yes.
the writer may have thought something completely different, and
Yes.
and going to the death of the author concept, which the Roland Barthes concept, which I believe very strongly. It's like I've had people read my stuff and come up with something totally different, but it's still very moving for them, right? So for me to come away from that and feel like in my little suburban Philadelphia 1970s world, these vampires were real.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, along with the fact that Bigfoot lived in the park across the street, I was horrified.
Oh
But
man, that's
yes,
so
but
awesome.
Sinners looks tremendous. I think one of the things that I find most compelling about it, like I said, I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, I won't spoil anything. I promise.
Oh, the fact that the stories of the Jim Crow South are already stories of hauntings.
Yes.
These to study just the flat out history of the Jim Crow South is to study hauntings.
Yes.
That this is why I thought Beloved was so good and why it also left me sleepless.
Right.
Because it was really about trauma. It was about PTSD. It was about trauma. It was about how we manifest ghosts, you know. And ghosts are manifested in our nervous system, and ghosts are manifested in the space around us because of our trauma, and how whole communities can carry that trauma. And so the idea of, and of course, just the affect of the early 20th century South, right?
Yeah.
The accents and the staging of it with the wood and the whiskey and the clothing and the guns.
Right.
It's just like this kind of pseudo frontier within America is in and of itself chilling. So I'm excited to see it. I'm really excited to see it.
Yeah. If
Makes
you
you
can
think
get
of
tickets.
it makes you think of Charles Chestnut's work. If you
Mm.
read Charles Chestnut's work and his stuff about the goofering, you know, he was the first, if I recall correctly, maybe someone can correct me on this, the first Black writer who wrote for the New Yorker. And he wrote in a Southern vernacular. So to look at it, it's almost like Train Spotting, where you look at the page and it's just like, what is this? But as you read it aloud, you get the rhythm of what they're saying and what's going on. It's written in this Black Southern kind of sharecroppers vernacular. But not to digress too much, but yes, looks good,
Oh
and
yeah.
it digs back into the type of thing I find fascinating.
Yeah. Once you said that you liked folklore and all those different things, I was like, I have to ask about Sam. That was
I have
like,
to tell y'all, I have been like, I'm going to see Sinners, but I can't see it in the theater because I get so immersed in story. I'm a story individual. I get so much immersed in story, man. If it got folklore, I'm bringing folklore home with me. Like I'm like I have to see it on a small screen, so I'm
yeah.
for that. But meanwhile, I keep hearing just how amazing it is. Now, what I love about our culture in particular, doing speculative fiction, is we have magic. It's like we're a spiritual community, period. And spirituality matched with the trauma that you're talking about, the hauntings that we have of our past. It's powerful story. And what I ain't lying. What I love about Ed's stuff is he brings that magic and he brings that history and it becomes magic on the page, man. So I know what I'm seeing of the centers, you know, promotions, and I'm sad I didn't. Man, that should have been my homework, Wayne. You could have been like, girl, see centers. We're gonna come back to the table and talk about African American community, their history, and speculative fiction. Girl, do your homework.
You know what I find so fascinating about that? You know what I find so fascinating? When I've sat down with mostly working class people and often rural people in different parts of the world, the concept of, I mean, magical realism is, I would say, important to me. I mean, I think it's like, but that's like Latino tradition.
Yeah.
But I've talked to people, you know, from Ireland. I've talked to Aboriginal people from Australia. I mean, the Gonigal people. I've had talks with them, and I've talked with people all over the world. But especially, it's been kind of like face to face sort of thing. That the thread of folklore and the thread of magic and the thread of there's this big, large, scary threat out there, or there's this trauma. I mean, I think the Irish really get at this pretty well too. That there is this trauma that just never lets go, and it manifests itself in so many different ways. I think it's one of those things that kind of forms a common thread, you know,
and humanity,
through humanity, that we will always be kind of visitors in this place that we don't really get. That, you know, there are always these forces, no matter where you're from, that we don't understand. And so when we were up in Alaska, I was talking to some Tlingit people and about their stories. And it's funny because I was kind of bringing this one guy up to speed on some of the stories from his nation. He was like, he had a certain set that he had studied and was talking about. But still, it was like, how do we live? Like, we ask this question, whether it's enslaved people or people in the potato famine or Tlingit people with their nations being overrun. How do I live in this place? How do I exist in this? How do I exist in this place? I'm here, but I'm not of here. There's something in this place where I'm supposed to feel sustained is going to destroy me. And, you know, I can't even go out on the ice. Something's going to kill me if my kids go too close to me, you know. And so, I mean, I did a paper on vampires when I was in graduate school. And so much of it was Slavic people from what is now Romania, from Poland, from Russia, saying, how do I live in this taiga? How do I live in these woods where, I mean, there are wolves will just come in and eat the whole family. And so it's like, you know, how do I keep my community together? And creating this story of, well, you know, if you're selfish, you're going to come back as this blood-sucking thing that eats your whole family, and you know, the whole community's going to die. And, you know, I do find, taking me back to my thoughts of just how folklore in general is such an interesting key, such an amazing highway to the human condition. You know?
It really is. And honestly, storytelling is what we use to take our fears and actually be able to handle them in some manner, you know, where a lot of folklore was birthed out of, don't touch that, don't do that. You know what I mean?
Cautionary tales, right?
Right. And it took people's fears and also, to be honest, their desire to manipulate and control, you know what I mean? Stories were used. So go ahead, Brian.
I thought this was a great segue into, we're talking about all these different places. One of the main through lines for you, Ed, is that like you love to travel. That is like a big thing in your work. But I specifically was interested in this writing ritual that you said that you have when you do travel. Tell us what that is, and also explain that a little bit. How did that come about? How has that served you?
Well, wherever we go, I like to sit down with the local drink and in a pub, usually, or bar, or some local place, some place that's not huge for tourists, and write and just put some work into whatever I'm working on. In fact, it's most important. I always have a journal. This is my newest one. This is my new journal, and my favorite pens. Right, and so it's
wait. What's your favorite pen? What's your favorite pen?
The gel pens.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that a G2?
the flow, right?
Yeah. my stocking stuffers at Christmas always pins. Get mommy pin.
Yeah.
Yes.
Help
Yeah.
pin.
There you go. Right.
Yes.
Right. My wife was good enough to invest in a whole lot of readers.
Oh,
Because
nice.
I break them and lose them, and so we've got piles of them
Yes.
around the house. But I will go to a local place and get a local drink, and it's and I just like to spend some time just listening to the local color and working on whatever new ideas I have. I wish I could remember where I first did it, but I mean, I know I've done it on cruise ships, I've done it in Australia,
Yeah.
in Greece, was many times, and it's for one thing, I just feel my amygdala just gets charged by that.
Yeah.
My amygdala gets charged, and when I was in Barcelona, we ended up at a bar where loyalists during the Spanish Revolution would write. Um, in the throes of the Spanish Revolution, this is where a lot of the loyalists would write, and so it had a lot of the old same tables and some of the old decorations, and so it was great being there, just like sitting there and thinking like this is where writers have done their work. And
Yeah.
I always think of myself as being a tyro. I mean, I'm always a student, and I'm still learning this. You know, I'm still learning in this, and so I'm just enjoying. I'm really giving myself over to enjoying the process, and that's a great way to enjoy the process, just to celebrate it with where you do it and how you do it. My family's been great. They've indulged me that I can get up at strange hours and light candles and sit in a dark room and write. And
Oh, wow.
Our family, yes, that's pretty dope. Our family would actually do just that as a family. Turn off the lights, light some candles, and we all write poetry. And it's just
awesome. That's awesome.
That's awesome. So it's probably like what would you say is, I mean, you probably have so many, but I would love to hear just like one unique, like outlandish story you might have had from one of these places that you've been, whether it's just in a bar, fight breaks out. So like, I don't know, but you're writing, some food gets tossed over. Like,
would that I had such a, but I think one big thing was just how I think there was a bar on a cruise ship actually, and I sat down and was writing, and this was I actually had whiskey, and I'm writing in this guy says, I heard you say you don't usually drink whiskey. What do you think? And I said, I don't like it because I figure you'll be here when I get back. He was about to go, still drinking whiskey and writing. I can tell.
wow. Were you there when he came back?
I think I was. I think my wife came back. He came back. I think like a whole
my goodness.
people came and went, and I was just scribbling. I had a really great journal too. It was a leather-bound journal that you could tie up.
Yes.
Oh my God. So he was just on the ship with you. He wasn't like the bartender or
no, he was on the ship with his family. I was with mine, and he just kind of sat there and watched me for a moment, just like writing, and going into my James Joyce moment, I guess.
Yeah.
I have a question. How important do you think it is for the writer to get out of their norm in order to find inspiration?
Yeah, it's funny. On so many levels, I'm trying to do that. I mean, you have to have a writing routine.
Mm-hmm.
So, like there's this balance, right? Because you have to have a routine.
That's good.
You just keep going back to it and back to it, but then you have to challenge yourself in some way. I know I can get stuck in my ruts very easily. I'm very much a creature of habit. So there are times when, someone will say to me, you didn't have to do that step today. I was like, yeah, but this is the way I tend to do things. So I'm it's very easy for me to fall into that. But at the same time, yeah, it's important to do that, whether it's with what you read, or I know I'm trying to be more open to meeting people, to like talking to people, meeting people, listening to their stories and their ideas and their narratives. So yeah, there has to always be something that's stimulating you, even if it's like I try not to use the same music all the time. Like there are some writing sprints that I
Yeah.
use. Often our bias will say, well, this thing that I've done before, this is the thing that I do, and I must always do this. And you feel almost disloyal when you don't. So it's like I try to find different types of music or ASMRs or something when I'm writing to see if something different happens.
And I might quote you on that one. That was real good what you just said. How sometimes
Yeah.
we get in our ruts and feel disloyal if we don't do them, not knowing that inspiration can be outside of them. That was good. Go
I,
ahead.
thank you. See, I have these amazing moments. I went to a writer's retreat. It was a week ago. So it was like, would have been week before last, I believe I was there. Yes, up in Pennsylvania. So a big thing for me was changing my venue. It was like
Mhm.
I looked for writers retreats. I found one and went to a retreat for 5 days where I worked on some pieces, did some great stuff. So it was my writing routine, but it was in a different place.
Yeah.
It
Mm,
wasn't in with time with domesticity at that point. It was just me with my writing with me, and so
yeah.
what great. I had a great experience.
Awesome.
That's awesome. And you're from Baltimore, right?
I am not. Um,
Okay. All right.
I am
See, glad
from.
I asked.
I'm from an outlying part of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. So
Oh, okay.
I grew up in Philadelphia in an area, kind of a hinterland between a neighborhood called Mount Airy and a neighborhood called Chestnut Hill. Kind of in a hinterland.
Okay. Yep.
And I went to a school there for 13 years, same school, from kindergarten to 12th grade, um, and lived in Philadelphia till I was 18. Yeah.
Oh
Okay.
wow. So how did you end up in Baltimore? Is the
So
next.
I went to George Washington University. We got married right out of college. My wife got a Teach for America teaching position in Baltimore. So we were both here as teachers. I was a museum curator for a while. Then we moved to Ohio. We were both teachers there. Then I got a position back here in Baltimore, and back we moved. So I worked as a teacher. I worked as a curriculum developer. So I've lived in Baltimore longer than anywhere else.
So you've been a teacher, police officer, and poet. And I'm just wondering how you juggle all of that for starters. How you've been able to, how you juggle that, but also how each of those professions have influenced your writing particularly.
Right. One thing that's been great is just been a whole lot of contact with the world. A
Mm,
whole lot of people have passed through my life, and I've been able to observe a lot. Um, I went from teaching to law enforcement because of 9/11. I decided I wanted to render service
Mhm.
um, after after the 9/11 attacks. So I kind of made a note to myself, I literally, I was working at Johns Hopkins as a curriculum writer, at a foundations at Johns Hopkins, and I was there that morning and wrote a note to myself to get my master's degree. That was supposed to be my first day of graduate school, and
Mhm.
mm.
earn my black belt, and then go get bad guys. And
Oh,
so I,
that's right. You are a black belt. I remember that from your bio.
Oh snap!
All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
great. And so I got myself prepared. I felt, and I became a police officer in Baltimore City. Did that for 19 years. So I'm out of policing now. I've retired from policing, and
Okay,
I'm a world literature teacher um, at a local
that's
school.
so awesome.
Tell me what's it like to be a law officer, a black law officer in America. What did you observe as a law officer? Because you get to be on both sides of that conversation.
No, it's funny because it's actually the conversation has so many different vantage points at any
Mm,
given moment
Mm,
because and plus it's always a matter too of what from which perspective you see it, and when you open the book, like what do you see right then and there that's going to stick
mm,
in that narrative. I can tell you we had we had a moment, and I'm thinking about maybe my second year of policing. So I was working, or plain uniform police officers.
Okay.
But Baltimore has struggled with a huge opiate problem, and struggles with a huge drug addiction problem, and the history of redlining is very real here.
Yeah.
So you can. It's funny because when we had a riot here in 2015, I had people calling in, friends of mine from other countries, even saying, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? Does your family have to leave?" And I said, "No, my neighborhood is absolutely fine."
Right.
What's going on is 10 minutes away, literally down a stretch of highway. It's complete mayhem. My neighborhood is completely quiet.
Yeah.
This is the way Baltimore's been broken up. So I'm thinking about this one incident in which we were able to do, and we had probable cause. We watched, gathered information. So this man had walked into a business and was dealing narcotics from the back of the guy's chicken restaurant. Just got himself a table, and
Right.
And we got the evidence we needed. We ended up going to arrest him. He decided he was going to resist and fight. Two guys. So we ended up rolling in the street with this guy. We get him in handcuffs. So at any point, someone could have looked at this and said, "Look what they're doing to that man.
Right.
Look what they're doing to that black man in that street. These cops are awful." Now, at the end of the day, the black business owner thanked us. A woman walked up to us with tears in her eyes and she said, "I hope you do this all day. These expletives are crazy." So I had experiences like that. I had experiences. I would get out of my car a lot. I would pull up and walk around. And this one woman came up to me one day, again with tears in her eyes, and said, "I live here. My daughter's school is right there." She says, "Mommy, I'm a big girl. I want to walk to school on myself. I can't let her unless you're here because of all the people that come out, the danger out here." And this to me was very striking because I never, ever in my experience felt this type of danger in my neighborhood. I never felt that. I never felt the police were a danger. I didn't know what a drug dealer. There was nothing. So it was like I had a very, very comfortable, controlled middle class environment growing up. So there's that. I think about the people with whom I worked. I worked with really some of the most phenomenal human beings, people that I was just kind of in awe of their insight, their maturity. I also worked with people that I thought were, to say, questionable, right? I mean, it's so I had a broad variety. It's a broad experience. I definitely saw what was going on in terms of the transition of our agency, that we had done things the wrong way a lot. And we were under scrutiny as to how we were going to change this. And I was actually part of that. I became an instructor at the academy. And so I taught Immanuel Kant, deontological ethics. I had them reading James Baldwin. I had them read Dostoevsky.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I had them read examples of people dealing with authority and dealing with law enforcement, and had them say, "Okay, let's break it down. What did they do right? What did they do wrong? What is the ethic that guides us?" Right. I use popular culture, and it was a lot of asking questions at certain points. Saying, let's not just go by cultural inertia, right? So then there's what I would call the neurological side of it. And this is something that I must emphasize that lots of people they don't get. Police officers start to experience horrific trauma like their first day on the job, and it just keeps going and going. You get aggregate trauma. So lots of police officers suffer from what's called CPTSD, complex PTSD. Not only did you experience something traumatic, but it happened over and over and over. And so there are times I do believe that officers, I know that I had to kind of step back and get therapy and be an inpatient because the trauma is just. And then it's funny because you start thinking, my gosh, this is awful. Then you talk to the next officer or the next firefighter and realize what they've gone through as well. So, and then on the issue of race, again, it's like, well, did I meet people of all sorts where I said, you know what, you really are racist. It's really pretty sad.
Yeah.
No, I'm not, but at the same time, did I meet egalitarian people that were really idealistic? Yeah. So it's complicated. Now, it's complicated on the one hand. On the other, the outcome needs to be binary. You need to have trust in your officers. You need to know this is a public servant who's not operating out of bias, who's not operating out of trauma, right? Who is focused and understands what his or her role is, And so I watched our agency growing. I watched our agency changing. I watched it struggling with this, and so definitely was, as they say, interesting.
I wanted to just on this topic, because one of your poems that really hit me was the folklore of sun showers. And I don't know if it's possible for you to read that. I know I had asked you, I had emailed you. That one. I would love for our audience to hear that poem, because I think it just speaks to just how close, you guys are to people in that line of work.
All right, so this is called The Folklore of Sun Showers. There was a devil's rain falling on the day that you asked me to kill you. I want to say that you begged me to do it, but that would be unfair. That would be me playing dramatic, free and loose with you. I want to say that you came to me on one supplicant knee, St. Francis of the alleyway, weary of your hypodermic stigmata, and that the only saving grace left in your world lay in the chamber of my automatic. And that would be a lie again. You spoke to me with the calm voice of a supplicant who realized, after this chase down the alleyway, he had grown ready enough to simply ask, "Could you put one behind my ear, officer? Ain't nobody gonna care, officer." And the sun was shining, and I could see my reflection in the tribulation of the puddles as a downpour drenched us both, fractured the sunlight, and threatened to wash the city away.
Wow.
Oh my
Wow.
goodness.
Wow. I'm understanding a lot more when you talk about having trauma as a police officer, as a law officer, how that takes place. That's powerful.
Yeah. Can you just oh no, go ahead.
Yeah. It just hit me. I mean, when you break down what your procedure is, okay, I've got probable cause. I see you, stop, you run, I grab you, I get you, handcuffs, okay, you're going to jail, well done, and good enough. But when you have someone who, in a situation like that, simply says they are so broken, they are so done with life, that they're like, you know what, you're the resource that I need to die, and I'd rather you kill me. And this was not the only time someone said that to me.
Yeah.
More than one situation in which someone just said, just shoot me. Just shoot me. I'm so done with life. So there's that level of trauma where it's like you come away thinking, oh my gosh, what has this person been through? This is why I think some people will talk to cops and they seem completely devoid of empathy. They seem like you're talking to a robot. You're like, my gosh, this guy's a jerk. I think lots of cops build up a callus. They're like, I have to just shut down my emotions. I have to shut down my humanity because this is such an avalanche of pain. I will be dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I remember a guy talking to me about you're talking about going to private school. So I went to private school, and this guy was telling me that he went to private school and how the priests were such great teachers and how he learned so much. And the thing is, this guy's sitting there wearing only gym shorts, and he's covered in scabies from head to toe. And he's infected. He just has pussy infections all over him. It's almost like something like a leper out of a biblical story. And he's sitting on the sidewalk. He's sitting on the sidewalk, leaning against a lamppost, talking very articulately to me about these things, and you're just sitting there suffering.
Mm.
And it was you don't forget things like that. In fact, you don't have to work to remember them. They just embed themselves in your
Yeah.
system. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're saying something really important about the vantage point of seeing things, if I think about myself who was brought up in, a more, inner city type neighborhood where my vantage point was almost anti-law officer
Mhm.
because, there wasn't any law officers in our family. We were in a area where law officers came in very aggressive in the the LAPD.
I
So
like
we had a completely antagonistic relationship with law officers.
Mhm.
It's healthy. This is why these discussions and conversations have to take place because we don't understand the vantage point from which law officers are operating. And yes, it is complex. You do have those who wanted to protect and serve, and you do have those who thought they were going to protect and serve, but they brought their biases and racism with them. So it's really important that you come from a vantage point, especially as a writer. We need that vantage point so that we can get perspective that isn't biased ourselves.
Right, right. And I mean, so the thing, I always think it's important that we keep that metric there. Like, okay, here's what we expect to see. What am I seeing? And then why? Like, am
Right.
I, because I mean, there was a case recently from the LAPD, some officers that were in the recruiting section that one guy had taped the conversations they were having and how horribly racist they were and how horribly sexist they were. And so you've got those guys. Then I can tell you that I've met LAPD officers. I've been trained by LAPD officers that were
Mm.
tremendous. And it's like, okay, so what's the reality of what I'm dealing with here? And when you add to all of that, you add the bias and you add the pain. Like for a lot of officers, that bias becomes their shield, right? That bias becomes
Mm.
their like patina of,
Mm.
you know, well, I'm just going to be afraid of these people all the time. I'm going to go
Yeah.
in this neighborhood just weaponized and afraid.
Mhm.
Because if I drop my guard, I'm going to get stabbed like this officer did, or I'm going to get attacked like that officer did, or I'm going to be disappointed and feel that I failed and see. I mean, it's like when you deal with one more child abuse case, when you deal with one more dead child, you deal with one more shooting, your brain starts to say, well, how do I make sense of this? I know all these people are terrible,
Right, right.
and you've got the officer who does that. You've got the officer who then continues to wrestle with it because she says, but I have to, it's, that child isn't the one that did it. That old person isn't the one who did it. And I have to, it's, it's a daily battle. And I mean, like I said, it's a continuum. And I mean,
Mhm.
I've met officers that I believe were actual fascists, and I've met officers that, you know, I've watched them nearly sacrifice their lives for a minority person
Mhm.
that they never
Right.
knew, that
Mm.
never they would never live in this neighborhood. This would never be their child's school. This would, but they literally put their body in front of someone, and so it's it continued. I mean, like I said, I've retired, and I continue to ruminate over it.
Mm, mm,
Yeah.
mm.
And it's still, the trauma is still very much. I mean, I have full blown PTSD, and I'm very. It's working its way out. It's funny because I'm writing a short, what I think is going to be a novella now, and it's science fiction.
We're excited to hear that.
Yes, it is, but I can see it's a science fiction war story, and I can see a lot of
Okay.
stuff coming out in it. I definitely can.
Yeah. One of the things you said too before the podcast was that how you think the world is kind of lacking in empathy right now. So I'd be interested just with the experience that we've already explored, like your experiences. Um, how do you maintain a level of empathy in this world, especially today with everything that's going on, politically, societal, economically, everything? How do you continue to keep
And
that?
with your PTSD, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Like how?
The difficult thing is your first impulse is, okay, let me withdraw and protect myself and those
Mm.
around me that are important to me. And a big part of that is dehumanizing the other. And
Mm.
and that's, it's one of those things where you've got to get up every morning and like do a daily reboot. Um, and I think really constantly bouncing ideas about empathy and about the current situation, bouncing it off of people and hearing them. And just like with understanding officers and officers understanding, like you said, people in certain neighborhoods. Okay, what am I seeing here? Like I think that as maligned as she was for saying it, I think Hillary Clinton said something very, very poignant during the first campaign when she had it out with Trump, where she said, half of his voters are the basket full, she said, of deplorables. And she said, the homophobic, xenophobic. She said, but the others, people often forget the rest of that quote.
Mhm.
She said the others are people that just don't understand a world that's changing around them, that have fears, that have, it was a very humanizing quote.
Yeah.
They always carved out the humanizing part of it. And I think trying to embrace the complexity of it, the complexity of any given human situation is part of what gets us there. I mean, I know as a teacher, um, I was just saying to someone that I can have a student who comes to me and says, "Yeah, I've missed a lot of work. Here's what's going on," and I really, and I'll kind of, I put that kid in I've humanized that kid, and okay, we'll talk about this. And the one that just kind of rolls her eyes and says, "Yes, so what?" Ding! I don't care if you fail. It's like, no, hang on. It's like, hang on. She probably has something going on here. Let's talk about why this child is doing this, even though she's rolling her eyes at you and telling you she doesn't care. It's like, so our presentation, our affect can often trigger that bias
Yeah.
that we have. Just real fast, we did an exercise one day. Like I said, I used to train officers. And we did an exercise one day in which the officers had to respond to a call. The trainees responded to a call. So we had come into this room. Okay, there's a loud party going on. There's a group of people. One of them has a gun. Figure out who has the gun. Isolate that person. So okay, we had a white woman, an Asian man, young white man, a black guy who was about twice my size, and then I was there. So the music's playing and we're being raucous and loud, and the neighbors called. And said, "I think I saw a gun in there." So the officers come in, most of them, a good portion of them come in, and they would look and say, "Hey guys, talk to us," and then realize, because when a person has a gun, there's a certain behavior you start to see.
Mm-hmm.
About half of them came in, looked around the room, saw the biggest black guy in the room, and jumped on him. And most of the time, he didn't have the gun. So they were wrestling with him on the ground, and Karen.
Oh my goodness.
And so she would pull the gun, or I had the gun, or the Asian guy had the gun. So we'd say afterwards, "So why did you make that decision?"
Oh man.
And he would just watch them kind of, "What did he? Did you see him? No, he wasn't doing anything." And it's like we can turn that humanity switch off so quickly when we're scared. When we're scared, we can turn that humanity switch off so quickly.
And that's what's happening, I feel, in this political environment where we have people who are turning their humanity off because they don't understand. You know how you were talking about the other half that Hillary Clinton was talking about, who are just afraid that things are changing and people are looking different and having different values, and we see people turning their humanity off, out of fear.
Yeah. When you've had a conversation with someone and she's just livid and through the roof about those transgender people, and she kept harping on sports, of course, but it was like I said, let's put that in a different category. Just how about just on a day-to-day basis? Is there a danger to you?
Right.
And then I showed her an article about American Front, which is a fascist organization. And I showed her a picture. I said, in this picture, these guys have just been arrested because they were going to attack a pride parade and try to beat people to death. They had guns, they had bats, and I said, who do you think is really a threat to your way of life? An armed fascist organization that wants to attack people in the streets, or the transgender person? And she said, the transgenders.
Wow. Wow.
I was like, okay.
Wow.
She's like, that told you everything you need to know.
There you go. All right, then.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. I think because people think that other people's values is a threat to theirs. And they don't understand if you insist on your values, all values are threatened. You know what I mean? If we can't insist on everybody has my values, then we have systems of conformity that's dangerous to all.
See, that's the thing that I found when I had that conversation. It illuminated so much, and in some ways, I felt like a dullard because I was like, this should have been obvious to me. But it's like you look at these concentric circles, and think, okay, here's a trans person who just wants to dress the way they want to, be spoken to the way they want to. Maybe they'll have an operation, maybe they won't. They're not forcing you to do this. You probably have interacted with this person any number of times. They go their way, you go yours. We do this all the time. You're more right wing, I'm more left wing. Okay, we go our way. As the concentric circles get larger, gets farther out, you have this fascist who says, part of what I want is to control your life, control this country, physically kill off a good portion of its population. And the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security has noted me as being an actual threat to the safety of this country. And your response to that is, and the quiet part, that she obviously would not want to acknowledge was, yes, but they wouldn't come after me. So my life would probably be okay. Plus, she didn't think too far into the future. There were lots of people who probably said, well, they come after me, like right now.
Right.
Because she didn't really know history. She didn't really understand fascist regimes in places like Argentina and the way apartheid worked and any of these things. It was just because when you're scared, you often go for the immediate solve, right? The immediate resolution. Get the trans people there. Okay, now I feel better.
Yeah. This actually is so great because there's two lines in your poem, The Actual Price of Her Bangles, that I love. And you say, where is it? She could tell you their whole story if you cared to hear. And I thought that was, talking about, like, that just stuck out to me when I read it, because I was just like, there's so much about people that we put on them just from our own biases, but we're not willing to hear their entire story. Therefore lacking empathy, just like we're talking about here. So I thought that was beautiful. I was actually wondering if you could read that poem for us too.
Thank you. Let's see here. The Actual Price of Her Bangles. She will run the whole way this time. When the sea voices tell her to, chanting shanties, mouthing driftwood barracoon songs, she will run the whole way to the breakers. She will leap the sea wall when the voices tell her to, the ankle bangles clanging against mosquito-worn flesh. She would tell you their whole story if you cared to hear, if the voices demanded that she recite their names and explain them across the breaking tide and breaking time and the clang of bangles she found one morning lost in the cursed sand of the Outer Banks. They had staved off tarnish in time, ever gleaming young, carrying the captive magic from the womb of the Middle Passage ship. She wore them as art, sensuous and hip, against the flesh and bone of her leg. Now she must sing the songs of the ballast people, their voices keeping time in her head as she runs towards the crashing waves, the seawall's widespread arms, and the oncoming tide.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can you read that one line? I just wanted to share a little bit. That one line that Wayne brought out.
She could tell you their whole story if you cared to hear.
I wanted you to just highlight that, just to explain how important our stories are as marginalized communities. When we present our stories and people even know to care, if they don't hear the story, they don't know that there are social situations and issues to be addressed. And that's why we do what we do at Kinsman Quarterly. That's why we do what we do, just amplifying marginalized voices like yourself. Thank you so much for sharing that story, which is a story for African Americans, our historical story. So thank you for that.
You know, it made me think. It's funny when you read your own work, like how you think, oh wow, I hadn't even thought of this particular part of that. But it's
Right.
like it hit me as I read that I remember talking to someone about how bars that cater to the LGBTQ plus population for many years through the 50s, 60s, 70s would have or sometimes in some places would have a red light bulb. And this red light bulb would go off if the police were nearby and people that were dancing could pair off
Right.
into heterosexual appearing couples.
Right.
When I've talked to older LGBTQ people about how they had to live, how they had to hide themselves. That there's this kind of a living monument in lots of these people that what they've had to do, and then it's funny. So this is when I'm talking. Sometimes my wife is like, "Will you stick to a subject? We're not done with that." There's a trend that's become popular of going to Auschwitz and taking like selfies, taking people standing in front of barracks and gas chambers and taking like, "Hey mom," like throwing up, "Hey,
Yeah. Right.
Auschwitz." Like, do you not understand the story?
Yep.
Would you go to, would you see that there's a problem if you went to a play that's supposed to be a tragedy and laughed your whole way through it?
Right.
And so we lose the story. We just have this end product of this person that I choose to humanize or not, but we often lose the story. Like, well, who is this person? How did they get there? Even when you have things like, even though we don't define it, but DEI, it's like, well, what's the whole story there? Or when I hear people say, well, it's about states' rights, like, well, to do what? Let's look at the whole story and see how we got here, right? And it's funny. I actually had a trainee once who was talking about the Unite the Right rally where Heather Heyer was killed, and he was saying how, well, but what about these statues? They want to tear down these statues, and this is our history. And I said, do you understand why those statues are there? Why those particular statues are in those particular places and when they were put in? I said, do you understand why there's a General Lee statue that was put in a city that he never visited, in a state that didn't join the Confederacy, and at that particular place, in that particular neighborhood? And I walked him through the whole story of how so many of these were put in as a middle finger to the civil rights movement, or as well. And his mouth kind of dropped open. And he said, if I had known that, I would never have taken the stance that I did.
Yeah.
Wow. As we start to wind out, I always love for our guests to leave something with the audience. So I know we talked about empathy. We talked about so many great things in this episode, but I would love if you have just like a word of encouragement for the audience. That would be awesome.
Sure. Could I read a new piece or?
Oh,
yes.
Yes.
Bring it.
You gotta ask me twice. Go ahead.
Okay, no problem. Okay, let me see here. Which one of these I'm feeling? Okay, so this one's got a bit of harsh language in it, but gotta mature.
Go for it.
Right.
Kinsman like, exclusive.
There you go. There you go. We like a little bit of static.
Absolutely. This is When Abuelo's Story Reaches You. By the time of Abuelo's story from so long ago reaches you. It is swollen by the sea. It has grown thickly muscled by swimming from Cuba and staggering up the beach on splayed planters' feet. It plays candomblé at the end of the working day in the cane and beseeches Orisha to season the village lovers one for another so that they may find each other in the dark. It swings a cane knife at night when the shadow people come to collect up the women and children. It uses a sickle's whistling blade to break open the plantation straw boss on the day an old man dies in the cane field furrows, and the boss man bellows, "One nigger less, one nigger more." Abuelo's story proclaims, with cigar pitch and rum, that the soil drinks the boss man's ink in the peninsular heat, and that the cane in that field still grows strangely dark, strangely sweet.
Mhm.
I mean, that.
Powerful, powerful, powerful.
Oh my goodness! Thank you so much for sharing
Thank
that.
you.
That
Yeah,
was,
that's why you're here. That's why you're here.
yeah. So
Drop some bars like that.
I think that's a great way to mic drop. Thank you so much, Ed, for being here.
It's
We're
my pleasure. My gosh.
absolutely amazing. Thank you, audience, for tuning in. Yeah, I'm gonna just leave it at that poem.
All right.
KQ on the Avenue is made possible in part with funds from Genesee Valley Council of the Arts Aid to Localities program. Enjoy the show.